Todd. I'm back, and we're going to talk today a little bit about analog signals and digital signals and some of the differences, and maybe we'll take a look at some analog signals on an oscilloscope, possibly maybe a signal from a synthesizer, or what a sine wave sounds like a single oscillator, and then maybe a guitar signal, just to what that might look like, and then maybe we can talk about how that gets digitized. All right, here we are at the DAW, and we're going to generate some sound and then look at it on an oscilloscope. We'll generate some oscillation tones, some regular sine wave type tones, and then we'll also generate some synthesizer tones and look at some guitar tones, and basically look at different signals. And when they go into the DSP, which has the A to D and D to A converters, the DSP will process those, and we'll just go through a sort of an explanation of what happens there. And before we do that, I'm going to do a quick whiteboard just to explain the signal processing path, just where the sine wave goes into the DSP and how it gets sampled and then how it gets played back. Okay, here we are at the whiteboard. It's a dirty whiteboard, like the 80s song, Dirty Whiteboard. But what we're going to do here is we're going to take just a sine wave, and we're going to show you how it gets sampled into analog to digital converter. This is your equipment for recording. That would be your M audio or your, whatever you're using for recording. But your sine wave, basically, it's going to look like this. It might be a signal for a guitar or chords, as I showed you earlier, but that's basically, to keep it basic, let's use a sine wave. And let's say we're sampling, at I don't know, let's just say 96 kilohertz. That's a pretty good sampling rate. So basically, as a signal comes through, this is time. So that over time it's going up, then it's going down, it's repeating like that to whatever instrument sound it is. And so the A to D converter is going to do what's called sampling, and it's going to, for this instance, it's going to sample it probably, at the highest frequency would be 4 times. Like if this were 20 kilohertz, then it would sample it 4 times. But we're just going to put some samples down. So if it comes here, we know that that's 0 volts, right? And let's just say that the peak of here is 5 volts. And the peak down here is minus 5 volts, okay? So then what we'll do is we'll do some sampling here at intervals, this interval, say this interval, and these are intervals in time, this interval, maybe that interval, and then over here, over here, over here, like that. So it's sampling numbers, voltages over time. So up here it might be sampling 4 volts, say, or this might be 5 volts. This next one might be 3.2 volts, or this might be 1 volt, and then here it's going to be negative 1 volt, and then 2 volts, and then say this is 4.5 volts, and then another 3 volts here. That would probably be 3 volts, just for estimation, and 2 volts, and then 0 volts. So you have all these voltages over time that it's sampling at this rate. And then what the A to D converter does is once it gets this digital data, it buffers it in to processors that take these numbers and convert them, or take these voltages and convert them to numbers. That's analog to digital, basically. So, this might be the number 0, this might be the number 92, this might be the number 128, this might be the number 88, and this might be the number, I don't know, let's just throw a number out there, 15. These would be negative numbers, minus 15, minus 25, or that's maybe 95, minus 120. So what we get is a series of numbers over time, like 0, 92, 5, or 128, 89, and then we'll go into negative numbers, minus 15. And so it takes this data here and it buffers it out to storage. It stores that. That's where your MP3 files or your WAV files, they have all of this data in it. So basically now the information has gone from analog to digital. So to go the other way, it has to pull those numbers off of the hard drive or off of the memory and play them back on a D to A. So what a D to A does, that is digital to analog. So we'll just chart that out as well. And so you can kind of see on the output what it does. So if we look at sample times, and it's not actually sampling, it's plotting, and it's going to be plotting that data, those numbers, and regenerating that waveform. So if this was 0, say, and it plots the number 30, they would go up here, and then the next one here would be, say, the number, I don't know, 62, and then so, but it's going to plot it, these numbers, they're going to be plotted kind of in the step form because it's digital data. You only have the data that you sampled. So you have chunks, but it can be reconstructed by doing this. If you were to play this waveform through audio, it would sound pretty dirty, almost like a distortion kind of sound. So what the D to A converter does is it smooths it out with filters, and it reconstructs the signal back and then plays it out. So, and this is oversimplified, but it's really being done just to give you a general idea of how all this works. And then so, if you look at actual guitar signals, you're talking about very complex, lots of frequencies might be in there, and a bass player might be playing in there as well. So this gets very complex, but when you're sampling all of this, and the frequencies are at a lower frequency, the higher frequencies, you lose the most if you're not sampling enough. But so if you're doing all these samples, then you can pick up this complex signal that I was showing you, and then it gets stored and replayed. So if you have to get a better output, you want a higher sample rate, or you want a wider bit. They started out like 8-bit, and they went to 16-bit and 24-bit, and so these higher bit rates play into giving you a better resolution and a better fidelity on the output. So hope that helps. Okay, now we're back over by the oscilloscope, We won't be using the signal generator, just take a look at the scope, and I'm going to run that same recording that we did on the DAW through the scope. I've got an output from the D to A converter and the A to D converter to these probes here. So the signal output is going to the oscilloscope. So we'll be able to hear it and watch it on the scope. So here we go. Low frequency, like 60 hertz. So it's going way up, probably in the thousands of hertz. Back down again. So as you can see there, that sine wave just kind of collapses as the tone gets higher, and that the higher frequency is there's more of those peaks in a window of time. And hertz is the measurement that we use to measure the frequency. That's the number. There is the noise. That's really noisy. And then we'll see the square wave after that. There's the square wave. From high frequency down to low frequency. And the ramps on the square wave have to do with the scope. I didn't calibrate the probes. Otherwise it would be a perfect square. So there you have it. Okay, I'm back. So what we did here is we took my guitar and I plugged a regular cable into it, and then at the other end of the cable I connected the end to a probe which goes into the oscilloscope. So now we can take a look at the actual signals that we're seeing on the guitar itself as I play it. So I'll go ahead and turn it up, and I'll play a low E. You can probably barely hear the guitar because I don't have it plugged into an amp. But if you look here, we've got this basically what we call an oscillating signal, but it looks a little different than the other one that we had. So if I hit this, I get a signal. As you can see, it's not a regular clear sine wave. It's got little waves within it and little different peaks. That is the different harmonics of the actual string. If I play a harmonic on the string, now I have even a different sound. Or if I play a higher note, we have a higher frequency. And then if I play multiple notes, like a little chord, as you can see, it gets pretty complex looking. But within that, you have this note, this note. If you put them all together, they get summized. They get summed. If you put them all together, they will be summed. I can spread this out a little more so you can see it. So this is one note. That would be like the A note, the E note, and then the C sharp note. So that's like an A triad chord. When you play the whole chord, all of those frequency components are in there. So that's really what is going into your amp. And then your amp from there amplifies that further until it can send it out to the speakers, and it might get conditioned with treble or bass, and we can talk about that along the way, but hopefully this makes sense to you. But that's basically how it looks on a guitar. What I can do is I can set up an oscillator with some volume, and then you can hear what just a plain oscillator sounds like. and then maybe we can add that in to a synthesizer and take a look at what the waves look like there. And then we'll sit down real quick and we'll look at how does a D to A or A to D converter sample that information into digital information, because that information has to actually turn into numbers, and those numbers get stored on a computer, and then when you want to replay, it pulls those numbers, buffers them into a memory, and then it does the opposite. It takes those numbers and it creates the analog signal from there using filters and basically using those numbers to gauge how high the amplitude is at a certain time. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, here we are back at the oscilloscope again, and I'm going to take those synthesizer sounds that I recorded and just play them from the synthesizer. So here you go. See how you have some low frequencies, and then within those frequencies you have these little high frequencies. And so this is what generates the different sounds. And then so as these signals are going into an A to D converter, each one of those signals at a different level is being sampled by the computer, and the sample will be a number. So if you thought of a number between 128 and minus 128, when those signals get sampled, they will be like a small bump up, might be the number 10, or a really high sample might be the number 128. A very low sample, like a negative sample, would be maybe the negative number 11. So as it's sampling those numbers over time, it's generating that signal digitally and storing it off on a hard drive. So this is where you'll see something called the sample rate. The sample rate typically, for CD quality is 44.1 kilohertz. And so how they come up with that 44.1 kilohertz for the rate of sampling is the highest you can hear is around so the highest frequency the human ear can hear is around 20 hertz. Well, in order to reconstruct the analog signal, you have to have at least 2 samples. So 2 samples times 20 kilohertz is 40 kilohertz. And then the extra 4.1 to make 44.1 kilohertz is more sampling to get rid of what they call aliasing while they're sampling. It's like a harmonic noise. The sample rates have gone up through the years from 44.1 to 96 and then 192. So that just means that it's sampling that analog signal more times in a second. And so the more samples it can get when it reconstructs it, it's more like the original analog signal. So that's why the higher sample rates are more advantageous. And then they also have what's called a bit length, and that has to do with computers. Computers started out with 4 and 8 bits, where each bit is a 0 or a 5 volts, and it makes a 0 or a 1. Okay, finally now, when I talk about D to A converters, this black rack unit, that is what I'm using. It's a Scarlett Focusrite, and it has the ability to sample at multiple rates. And so when I talk about A to D converter, A to D or D to A converters, that's what I'm referring to. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit subscribe and ring the bell if you would like future notifications of videos. Thank you.